Good evening, traveler. Tonight I would like to tell you about a place I once came upon while wandering through a quiet stretch of forest. A place where beauty and danger had grown so closely together that it became difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. So settle in and let us walk that path together, slowly and without hurry. It happened during one of my longer journeys through a region I had walked many times before, though never quite in the same way twice. You may remember it. Whispergrove, a forest not marked on most maps, not because it was hidden, but because it had little interest in being fully known. Even a familiar path in such a place has a way of leading somewhere new, if one follows it long enough. I entered it late in the afternoon, as I often do. The path, if it could still be called that, wound gently between tall trees whose branches had long since grown together overhead, forming a soft, green canopy that filtered the light into a calm, muted glow. Pine and birch stood side by side, their trunks spaced irregularly, as though each had chosen its place without concern for symmetry. The ground beneath my boots was soft with moss and fallen leaves, and each step made very little sound. The forest itself seemed content to keep it that way. There were birds, of course, a distant call here and there, the faint tapping of a woodpecker somewhere deeper among the trees. But even these sounds felt measured, as though the forest preferred quiet company. I had been walking for some time when I first noticed the scent. Faint at first, almost easy to ignore. A trace of something sweet drifting through the cool air. Flowers, which, under ordinary circumstances, would not have been unusual. But not here, not in this part of Whispergrove. There were no flowers growing along the path, not a single one. Only moss, roots, and shadow. So I slowed my steps, not out of concern, but out of curiosity. The scent grew stronger the farther I walked, and with it, the light began to change. Not brighter exactly, but warmer, as though the forest ahead had chosen a different hour of the day to exist within. It was not long before the trees began to thin, at first only slightly, a little more space between the trunks, a little more sky visible above. Then, quite suddenly, the forest opened. It is a curious thing, stepping from one part of Whispergrove into another. There is no clear boundary, no sign to mark the change. And yet, one always knows. Before me lay a wide stretch of open land. Great hills rolled outward in gentle waves, their slopes covered in thick grass and countless flowers of every color one might imagine. And beyond them, mountains rose tall and pale against the sky. Their shapes reminded me of distant ranges I had seen in other lands, though these seemed softer somehow, less severe, as though time, or perhaps something else, had persuaded them to be kinder. This was not the Whispergrove I knew, and yet it was undeniably part of it. The entire valley was alive with color. Blossoms swayed in the breeze, petals drifted lazily through the air. It was beautiful, almost impossibly so. And yet, even as I stood there taking in the view, a quiet thought settled in the back of my mind. Whispergrove does not create beauty without reason. It was then that I noticed the tower. It stood some distance away, perched upon one of the higher hills, tall, though not entirely straight. Its structure leaned slightly to one side, as though it had been built with great enthusiasm, but perhaps not with equal precision. Stone walls climbed upward in uneven layers, and a narrow window near the top flickered with shifting light. Even from afar, one could sense that the tower was not abandoned, not forgotten. It was very much alive with activity. Curiosity, as it often does, made the decision for me. I began walking toward it. I had not made it halfway up the hill before the door of the tower burst open. A figure stepped out quickly, then stopped just as suddenly. He was an older man, though his exact age seemed less important than the restless energy he carried with him. His robes were layered and mismatched, covered in stains of color that may once have been intentional. Petals clung to the fabric, some fresh, some long since dried. His hair stood in all directions at once, as though it had grown tired of choosing a single path. He looked directly at me. For a brief moment neither of us spoke. Then he pointed, not aggressively, but with complete certainty. The wizard spoke. "You are here to help." It was not a question. I paused, then inclined my head slightly. "I was not aware that I was expected," I replied. The wizard waved a hand dismissively. "No one ever is." He turned and began pacing in a small circle, muttering to himself. "Timing is terrible, absolutely terrible, but also perfect. Yes, perfectly terrible timing." He stopped again, looked at me and said quite calmly, "The hills are waking up." At first I believed this to be a manner of speech, a poetic way of describing some imbalance in his work, but the wizard shook his head before I could ask. "No," he said, pointing toward the ground. "Listen." So I did. At first, nothing. Only the soft movement of wind through grass, the quiet shifting of petals. But then, beneath it all, something deeper, a faint rhythm, slow, heavy, like a distant heartbeat carried through stone. I remained still, listening, and once it was noticed, it became impossible to ignore. The ground beneath us was not entirely still. It moved, not enough to unbalance a person, not yet, but enough to be felt. The wizard watched my expression carefully. "Yes," he said quietly. "That is the problem." He began walking again, gesturing toward the hills around us. "I wanted them to bloom," he explained. "And they do. Beautifully, I might add." He paused as though allowing himself a moment of pride, then sighed. "But I may have encouraged them too well." I looked across the valley once more. The flowers swayed as before. The colors remained as vibrant. Nothing, at a glance, appeared wrong. And yet, now that I was listening, I could feel it, that slow, steady pulse beneath everything. "What exactly have you done?" I asked. The wizard hesitated, which is rarely a comforting sign. "I connected the growth," he said at last. "Not just the plants, the soil, the roots, the stone beneath." He tapped his foot lightly against the ground. "All of it. Together." The moment he said it, the ground shifted more noticeably. A low sound rolled through the hill beneath us, and from somewhere above, a sharp crack echoed across the valley. We both turned. A fracture had formed along the base of the tower, thin at first, but spreading. Stone shifted against stone. Dust drifted down the side of the wall, and a small section near the lower structure broke loose and tumbled down the slope below. The wizard did not move. For a moment he simply stared. Then, very quietly, the wizard spoke. "No." Another pulse moved through the ground, stronger this time. The crack widened. Roots, thick, pale, and far too large to belong to any ordinary plant, pushed upward through the earth beneath the tower's foundation, lifting, forcing, breaking. The tower leaned, just slightly more than before. The wizard took a step forward, then stopped himself, as though unsure whether approaching it would help or make it worse. "My work," he said, almost to himself. Not proudly this time, not excitedly, just quietly. Behind us, the hills continued their slow, steady motion, and far beneath it all, that deep, rhythmic pulse continued. Stronger now, closer. The wizard turned back to me, and for the first time since I had met him, he looked uncertain. The wizard spoke. "If the heart fully wakes." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Another crack split the stone, and a larger section of the tower shifted out of place. The valley, for all its beauty, was no longer still. It was beginning to move. For a moment, neither of us moved. The valley, this hidden corner of Whispergrove, continued its slow, steady motion beneath our feet, the deep pulse now impossible to ignore. It rose through the ground in measured intervals, each one stronger than the last, as though something far below the surface had begun to stir in its sleep, and was slowly deciding whether or not to wake. I had walked Whispergrove many times. I had seen its paths shift, its trees rearrange themselves, its clearings appear and disappear without warning. But this was different. This was not the forest changing. This was something within it trying to become something else. Another section of the tower gave way. Stone broke loose from the upper wall and fell in a heavy cascade down the slope. A narrow window shattered outward, the sound echoing briefly before fading into the open air. The wizard flinched, not dramatically, but enough. I looked across the valley. Now that the movement had revealed itself, it could be seen everywhere. The hills no longer rested still. Their shapes shifted subtly, as though the land itself adjusted its weight. Flowers turned, not toward the sun, but toward motion. Petals drifted in patterns that followed no natural wind. And beneath it all, that steady rhythm. "What happens if it wakes completely?" I asked. The wizard hesitated, then spoke quietly. "It will continue, growing, moving. It will not understand restraint." Another pulse, stronger, closer. "The roots will deepen, the stone will shift, the hills will try to become something else." He glanced toward the distance. "And Whispergrove may not remain as it is." Behind us the tower groaned. A long crack split its side. Dust fell in a slow curtain. "Can it be stopped?" I asked. "Yes," he said quickly. Then, after a pause, "In principle." He pointed across the valley. "There are anchors, control points, 3 runestones." He raised his fingers. "Growth, movement, awareness." The ground pulsed again. "They must be activated together." balanced, within the same moment. I looked at the distance between them, and they are too far apart. Yes, and you cannot do it alone. No. For a moment I said nothing. I looked across the valley, at the vines stretching between hills, at the roots beneath the flowers, at the countless connections already present. Whispergrove was never separate things. They are already connected, I said. The wizard frowned. That is the problem. No, I replied. That is the answer. The valley provided what we needed. We gathered long, living vines and stretched them between the three stones, tying them with care. Not tightly, just enough to carry movement between them. The wizard watched, then slowly nodded. You are not forcing them, he said. No, I replied. We are letting Whispergrove do the work. Another pulse moved through the ground, stronger now. The tower shifted again in the distance. We must do it now, I said. He took his place at one stone. I held the lines between the others. We waited. The pulse came. Closer. Now! We pulled. Not with force, but with timing. The vines tightened. The stones responded. Light flared across their surfaces. At first, nothing aligned. The ground surged. The carvings shifted. The tower strained. Hold, I said. We adjusted, not by strength, but by feel, following the rhythm beneath us. Another pulse. We moved with it. Another, closer still. The stones began to respond together. The light steadied. The movement hesitated. Then surged one final time, stronger than all before. The tower's upper section broke free. Stone fell. The valley seemed to draw in a breath, and then stillness. The ground settled. The pulse faded. The rhythm disappeared. The vines loosened. The stones dimmed. And Whispergrove returned to itself. We stood in silence for a moment. Only wind moved now, only grass. I looked toward the tower. It still stood, broken, leaning, but standing. The wizard followed my gaze. It is not as it was, he said quietly. No, I replied. He nodded. But it remains. We walked back as evening settled over the hills. The flowers moved gently now, no longer driven, only growing as they were meant to. At the base of the tower, he paused. He studied the cracks, the missing stone, the long fracture running through its side. I will rebuild it, he said. Yes. He gave a small nod, more carefully. I did not stay long after that. Whispergrove rarely asks for more than one lesson at a time. At the edge of the hills, I paused and looked back. The tower stood against the fading light, imperfect, but steady, and the valley rested quietly within the forest that had always held it. The fire beside you is burning low now, traveller, and somewhere deep within Whispergrove, beyond the paths most choose to follow, there is a place of flowers and quiet hills, where even the land itself once came close to waking. You are safe to rest. Good night, my friend. May the paths you follow always guide you gently, and may you always know when something is meant to grow, and when it is meant to remain as it is.